She hadn't even opened her mouth, hadn't said a word, before two uniformed officers were already walking toward her seat. Not a warning, not a question, just cold, deliberate removal. "You need to step aside, ma'am." That was all it took. 4 words, spoken like a command issued to a threat, not a black woman holding a fully paid first-class boarding pass. And as she stood, calm but alone, the flight crew didn't glance at her ID. They didn't ask a single question. They didn't need to. To them, her skin already answered everything. This isn't the beginning of her story, it's the boiling point. The moment everything they thought they knew about her became their greatest mistake. Because what happened next didn't just change their flight. It changed the system watching them from the inside. Who is she? Why didn't she fight back? And what exactly was in that envelope she kept so carefully guarded? This is not a story about race. It's a story about what people assume race means. Watch till the end to see how silence can become the sharpest form of justice. Drop your theories in the comments. What moment caught you off guard? Where are you watching from? And if this made you pause, made you think, or made you feel something, hit subscribe. You'll want to be here when the truth lands. Naomi Ellis had always moved through airports with quiet efficiency, her movements practiced and deliberate, like someone who understood both the value of time and the cost of being watched too closely. She had no interest in standing out, and usually she didn't. Her clothing was understated. Dark jeans, a clean white blouse, a fitted gray jacket. No logos, no flash, just presence, firm but unassuming. This morning was no different. Terminal C was already buzzing with the soft chaos of pre-dawn travelers, most still rubbing sleep from their eyes or cradling overpriced lattes. Naomi stepped through the automatic doors of Northview International with her compact leather duffel slung over one shoulder and her boarding pass already pulled up on her phone. She'd flown this route dozens of times, Boston to Denver, never first class until today, but that wasn't because she couldn't afford it. She was always working. Today, technically, she was still working, but in silence, in observation, and under no one's radar. The assignment was simple: blend in, fly quietly, take notes. Her agency didn't need drama. They needed patterns, details, proof of what the data was already suggesting. Naomi knew how to stay invisible when she wanted to. She also knew when it wasn't possible. The moment she veered toward the first-class check-in, she felt it. The shift in the air, subtle but cold. The woman behind the counter, mid-30s, blonde bob, navy blazer tight at the elbows, watched Naomi approach with an expression too polite to be friendly. "Ma'am," she said quickly before Naomi had even spoken, "this line is for first-class passengers only." Her voice was controlled, but the edge was there. Naomi offered a small, measured smile and held out her phone. "I know," she replied, tilting the screen toward her. "Flight 2910 to Denver. Seat 2B. The woman squinted at the phone without touching it. A couple stepped up behind Naomi, white mid-40s, dressed in business casual leisure. The man gave Naomi a quick glance, then looked to the agent. "We're in first class too," he said. The agent smiled at them immediately. "Of course, welcome," she said, bypassing Naomi's extended hand and taking their passports first. Naomi waited, hand still raised. The woman ignored it. "I'm going to need to see a physical ID," the agent said, eyes finally sliding back to Naomi, lips thin. "And a frequent flyer card if you have one. Sometimes people select the wrong check-in lane." Naomi said nothing, reaching calmly into her jacket for her ID. Her voice didn't waver. "I'm TSA pre-check. The boarding pass is verified." "I understand," the agent said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But sometimes the system prints an upgrade when it's not actually processed. We just want to make sure." Naomi handed over her government-issued ID, the kind that didn't have a state listed. The woman's expression flickered, briefly, almost imperceptibly. But Naomi saw it. She always saw it. The agent took the ID, scanned it, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, "All right, you're clear," she said, sliding the ID back like it was something unpleasant she didn't want to hold. "Gate D4. Boarding begins at 6:40. You can proceed to the lounge if you like. The smile was back, but it was brittle. Naomi tucked her ID away, thanked her quietly, and moved past the counter without looking back. She didn't need to. She could already feel the couple's eyes on her. The agent's narrowed glance now aimed at her computer screen, like it might explain what her instincts didn't approve of. She reached security, where the same dance played again. Her boarding pass was scanned, her ID double-checked, and again she was told, "Random screening, ma'am." It wasn't unusual, not on its own. But when it happened this early in the process, before she'd even reached the TSA pre-check lane, it stopped being random. She submitted calmly to the search. Shoes off, hands up, duffel opened. The agent rifled through her items without asking. Toothbrush, charger, notebook, a small black wallet. Nothing out of place. Nothing to justify suspicion. But that wasn't the point. The point was to remind her that someone else was in control. Temporarily, perhaps, but enough to try and make her feel small. Once cleared, Naomi didn't hurry. She walked through the concourse like she always did, quietly, with purpose, noting everything. Which passengers were being offered upgrades? Who was being greeted by name? Who was being ignored? At the Skylux Airlines lounge, she approached the front desk. Another agent, this one younger, softer-spoken, but still visibly thrown when Naomi handed over her first-class credentials. "Are you traveling alone?" he asked. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Is that unusual?" No, of course not," he replied quickly, typing faster. "Just confirming." The lounge wasn't busy, and she found a seat tucked near a window, her bag beside her, her phone untouched. She didn't need to scroll. She needed to observe. 20 minutes passed. She watched 3 white businessmen get upgraded to executive tier. One woman complained about coffee and was offered a $50 voucher. A man in gym shorts cut ahead of 2 people in line, and no one said a word. Naomi kept her expression unreadable. She'd seen it all before. But repetition didn't mean desensitization. It meant confirmation, pattern, structure, evidence. Her phone buzzed once, a calendar reminder, not a message. She swiped away. Her mission today wasn't confrontation. It was data. But every microaggression, every glance, every delay, every assumption, they all told her the same thing. Even when you follow every rule, someone will still look at you like you don't belong. And the system? It's built to agree with them until someone dares to prove otherwise. Naomi moved toward the TSA pre-check lane with the same practiced calm she'd maintained all morning. Her boarding pass already displayed on her phone, her ID tucked between her fingers. The queue was short, mostly early business travelers in tailored blazers or Lululemon zip-ups, eyes half-lidded from lack of sleep and overpriced airport coffee. As she stepped forward, the scanning agent gave her a once-over that lingered a beat too long. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step to the side for a quick check," he said, gesturing toward a narrow lane partitioned by blue stanchions. She blinked once, then looked down at her pass. "TSA pre-check," she said calmly, raising the barcode. "Yes," he nodded quickly, "but we're doing a random bag check. Just routine." Naomi didn't protest. She'd been in this situation before. The word random had a strange way of showing up when certain people walked through security checkpoints. She stepped aside, handed over her duffel without flinching, and watched as another 3 passengers breezed past without a second glance. 2 men in Patagonia vests and a woman in a silk scarf. Not one of them stopped. Her fingers remained still at her sides, but internally, she was already logging the order, the timing, the body language. The agent unzipped her bag with clinical detachment, sifting through the contents with gloved fingers. Toothbrush, book, folded blazer, a zippered pouch with personal hygiene items. He paused at her notebook, a slim leather-bound journal, and flipped through a few pages. "Work notes?" he asked, more out of curiosity than necessity. Naomi nodded, not bothering to elaborate. He checked the inside seams of her bag, tapped the base with the back of his knuckles, then gave a perfunctory nod. "All clear," he said, motioning her toward the reassembly bench. She repacked quickly, efficiently, but she could still feel the weight of eyes watching, not security cameras, but something closer, more personal. As she finished tying her shoe, she heard it. 2 TSA officers near the exit were murmuring, just low enough to assume they couldn't be heard, but just loud enough that their words didn't vanish entirely. One of them, a younger man with a badge that read C. Hamlin, leaned toward his colleague and chuckled under his breath. "This is exactly why I keep saying first-class perks shouldn't be bundled into promo packages," he muttered, jerking his head subtly toward Naomi. "You open the door, and suddenly everybody walks through it like they own the sky." His partner snorted in response, but didn't disagree. Naomi didn't react, not outwardly. She adjusted her collar, lifted her bag, and walked away, each step measured, steady. It wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time, it wasn't just another slight to swallow. This time, it was part of the record. She moved through the terminal with that same quiet elegance, noting details as if her mind had turned into a moving ledger. The man at gate D3 arguing about his upgrade status and getting it without a second thought. The woman in oversized sunglasses who was waved through the boarding line with nothing more than a smile. The gate agent who didn't even glance at her barcode before pressing the scanner. Everything was data. Everything was evidence. And this airport, this flight, was already revealing more than she'd expected. Naomi reached her assigned gate 15 minutes early. The digital board flashed, Flight 2910, on time. She took a seat in a corner near the windows, where she could see both the gate desk and the boarding tunnel. Her posture was relaxed, but her senses were dialed in. The loudspeaker crackled occasionally with final calls and boarding groups, but her attention was on the people. A supervisor passed by, clipboard tucked under one arm, chatting casually with another agent about employee schedules. Naomi caught a glance from the agent behind the desk, brief, then withdrawn, but marked with the same evaluative flicker she'd felt all morning. It was a look that didn't ask, "Is she okay, but does she belong?" A couple approached the desk, an older man in a designer suit and a younger woman in a matching travel set. They were greeted with smiles, casual familiarity, even laughter. The woman made a comment about the weather in Denver, and the gate agent nodded like they were old friends. When Naomi stepped up 2 minutes later to confirm a change in boarding order, the smile disappeared. "Boarding hasn't started yet," the agent said curtly. "You'll be called by group." Naomi held back a reply, only nodding once. "Understood. I was just checking if pre-boarding was still in effect for first class." The agent hesitated, clearly reconsidering. "It is," she finally said, but her tone stayed clipped. "We'll announce it when it's time." Naomi returned to her seat and began scanning the room, watching how people moved, where they looked, what they avoided. A father and son played a travel game on a tablet nearby. A woman argued softly with her partner over seating preferences. And behind her, 2 employees chatted at the gate computer, their voices slightly raised. "That one's first class," one of them asked, not bothering to lower his volume. "Apparently," the other answered. "Maybe it's one of those corporate incentive things. Happens when you book through third-party firms." Naomi looked straight ahead, unmoving, as the burn crept up her spine. The commentary was always coded, never explicit. But the implication was clear. You didn't earn this, so how did you get here? She leaned back slightly, her duffel still on her lap, her fingers brushing against the zipper like she was grounding herself. She'd expected resistance. She hadn't expected it to come this soon or this confidently. There was a strange kind of comfort in how bold the judgment had become, as if the system had stopped pretending it was neutral. She thought of the phrase she'd written in her notebook last night, something a mentor once told her. "Power doesn't shout. It whispers where no one else is listening." And right now, the whispers weren't just loud. They were being spoken directly into her path, one bias at a time. She checked her watch. 23 minutes to boarding. The same agents still hovered at the desk. The supervisor hadn't returned. A flight attendant in a fitted blazer rolled by with a clipboard, laughing into her earpiece, clearly unconcerned. Naomi took a breath, slow and even, and reached into her bag, not for her phone, but for a folded sheet of paper she'd tucked into a side pocket. She didn't unfold it. Not yet. Just held it in her lap, her thumb pressing lightly against the crease. It wasn't time to move yet. Not until the next signal. Not until they showed her more. And they would. They always did. The boarding call for Flight 2910 came over the speaker just as Naomi unfolded the document in her lap and refolded without reading a word. It wasn't time to act yet. Not until she saw more, and she knew she would. She rose smoothly, walked to the first-class queue, and felt the same flicker of attention press against her like static. Some passengers barely glancing, others double-checking, as if the line itself was somehow self-policing. When the gate agent scanned her pass, the brief pause before the beep was almost imperceptible, but not to Naomi. Nothing about this flight would go unnoticed. She boarded, found her seat, 2B, slid her duffel into the overhead bin, and settled in without a word. She always preferred aisle seats, and this time it wasn't for comfort. It was strategy. First class filled quickly with the usual characters. Older men in golf polos, younger men in suits, women dressed in layered athleisure and casual wealth. None of them spoke to her. That suited Naomi just fine. The flight took off without incident, smooth skies and minimal chatter. Naomi pulled a small paperback from her bag, not to read, but to give her hand something to hold that wasn't tension. She had barely reached page 3 when she felt it, a dull ache low in her abdomen. She recognized it immediately, the slow tightening that signaled she needed to get up. Her blood sugar was dipping. She had monitored it before boarding, eaten what she always did, but stress had a way of skewing everything. She stood slowly, carefully, the way people do when they don't want to cause trouble. She took a single step into the aisle when a voice cut in sharp and crisp. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. The seatbelt sign is still on." Naomi turned. The voice belonged to a flight attendant with tightly slicked back hair and a smile that didn't extend past his lips. She glanced at the cabin lights. No turbulence. No announcement. She looked at the screen overhead. No seatbelt icon flashing. "I need to use the restroom," she said plainly, without emotion. "I'll return quickly." The attendant's smile thinned further. "We're about to enter light air traffic. I'll need you to remain seated until we confirm it's safe." Naomi blinked once, measuring. She didn't challenge him. She nodded, returned to her seat, and sat with her hands resting on the armrests. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then 3. A passenger across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a loose button-down shirt, stood, stretched his back, and walked casually to the lavatory without hesitation or interference. Naomi watched him go. The same attendant who had blocked her said nothing. In fact, he stepped aside to let the man pass. When the man returned and slid back into his seat, Naomi stood again, this time slower, calmer, but firmer. She took one step, then another. The same attendant turned toward her, stepping into the aisle deliberately. His arms didn't move, but his posture did. He became a wall. "Ma'am, I need you to sit back down," he said, voice low now, so only she could hear. Naomi spoke just as quietly. "I'm diabetic. I need to manage my condition. It won't take a minute." "That's not the issue," he replied. "It's about compliance. Cabin protocol." She tilted her head slightly. Protocol that seems to shift depending on who's asking. His jaw clenched. Then he said it flat and sharp. "You take another step, and I'll have to notify the captain. If the captain sees this as non-compliance, we reserve the right to initiate a diversion for passenger safety." Naomi didn't move. "You're saying if I go to the bathroom, you'll force an emergency landing?" "If the situation escalates," he said coldly, "yes." She stared at him for a beat longer. His eyes didn't flinch. She could smell the scent of over-applied cologne, hear the murmured conversation behind her fading to awkward silence. Someone was listening. Someone always was. Naomi turned and returned to her seat. Her hands didn't tremble. Her breathing didn't change. She sat, calmly buckled herself in, and closed her eyes. The ache in her abdomen spread, slow and insistent. Her body was holding the line, now, not just her mind. She reached into her duffel and retrieved a small glucose tab, popped it in her mouth without ceremony, chewed slowly. The sugar helped, but only a little. Still, she sat. Outside the window, clouds drifted like indifferent gods, distant and weightless. Inside the cabin, pressure tightened. The man who had gone to the bathroom earlier looked at her now, sheepishly, as if realizing something far too late. Naomi ignored him. She focused instead on the rhythm of her breath and the small tremble she felt in her leg, the kind that came not from fear, but restraint. The seatbelt sign pinged off minutes later. No announcement, just a faint chime. Naomi didn't move. She waited. 5 minutes passed. The same attendant walked by again, offering a smile to someone in row 1, chatting with a couple in row 3. When he reached her row, he didn't stop, didn't speak, didn't look at her. He just passed, leaving a trail of silence in his wake. Naomi sat still, absorbing it all. The selective enforcement, the performative threat, the unspoken message embedded in the way he chose who was allowed freedom and who wasn't. Across the aisle, the man who had gone earlier cleared his throat. "Hey," he said gently, "if you need to go, I can." Naomi held up a hand, not to stop him, but to end the moment. She didn't want his guilt. She didn't want anyone else's voice in this. Not yet. Not here. The story had to unfold the way it was being written, without interference, without rescue, without compromise. This was not about what she needed. This was about what they were willing to deny her, just because they could, because they believed the cabin was their jurisdiction, and she was an anomaly inside it. She pressed her back against the seat, glanced at the closed lavatory door ahead, and waited again. There was no need to challenge the system directly, not when it was already revealing itself with such clarity. The seat across from her rustled. Someone flipped a page in a newspaper. The flight attendant passed again. Still no acknowledgement. Naomi reached into her pocket and removed a tiny notepad, wrote down 4 words, and tucked it back in without breaking eye contact with anyone. She didn't need to raise her voice, not when the structure was shouting every word for her. The moment the silence began to settle again, the hum of the aircraft reclaiming its dominance, Naomi reopened the small notepad in her hand and drew a single line beneath the note she'd written earlier. She didn't write more. She didn't need to. The story was already unfolding, and every moment only sharpened its edge. The seatbelt light remained off. Passengers moved casually now, some to stretch, others to access their bags. Naomi stayed seated, her posture unchanged, her mind calibrated to the rhythm of the unfolding pattern. When the flight attendant returned, his eyes didn't meet hers. Instead, he leaned over to speak to the man seated behind her, loud enough for her to hear, soft enough to feign discretion. "Mr. Keller, we'll be making that adjustment momentarily. Thanks again for your patience," he said, then turned directly toward Naomi's row. A second later, a different flight attendant, this one female, mid-30s, blazer neatly pressed, lipstick too perfect to have been applied casually, approached from the front of the cabin. Her steps were brisk, her expression clipped, the kind worn by someone who'd convinced themselves professionalism justified condescension. She didn't ask. She didn't pretend. She stopped directly beside Naomi's seat and spoke clearly, as though reading from a prompt rehearsed in the galley. "Ms. Ellis," she began, "we're accommodating a returning executive elite member who prefers window seating. We'd like you to relocate to 4D for the remainder of the flight." Her voice was neutral, but the edge, polished and precise, cut through the air with intent. Naomi looked up. Her tone was calm. "That wasn't a request, was it?" The flight attendant's smile tightened. "We're asking for your cooperation." Naomi glanced at the seat in question, 2 rows back, noticeably tighter, closer to the galley, not equivalent. "This is my assigned seat," Naomi said simply. I boarded with a confirmed reservation. I'm not interested in moving." The flight attendant's face didn't change. "We're prioritizing seating for passengers with elite loyalty status." She didn't blink when she added, "We try to ensure the front row is available to guests who align more closely with our service expectations." That was it. No codes, no camouflage, no effort to soften the implication. Naomi stared at her, then said quietly, "You mean someone who looks the part?" The woman said nothing, only shifted her weight slightly, as if that small movement might somehow add gravity to her authority. "Please be aware," she continued, her voice rising slightly for nearby rows to hear, "refusing a seating adjustment may be documented as non-compliant behavior." Naomi didn't move. "I'm not refusing a request," she said. "I'm declining an ungrounded directive. There's a difference." The woman hesitated, just long enough for her confidence to fracture. Then she turned and walked toward the front of the cabin, her heels clicking too loudly on the carpeted floor, the sound brittle and forced. Naomi adjusted her posture and sat back. 30 seconds passed. Then the attendant returned, this time with a deliberate pace and a louder voice. "Excuse me, everyone," she said as she arrived beside Naomi again. "We're addressing a situation with passenger 2A, who has declined to cooperate with the seating change necessary for crew coordination. We appreciate your patience as we work through this." The words were coded in neutrality, but their design was surgical. The intent wasn't communication, it was condemnation. The message was clear: this passenger is the problem. Heads turned, not all at once, but enough. A wave of glances, hesitant and speculative, swept across the cabin. Naomi didn't flinch. She kept her eyes forward, her breath steady, her hands resting calmly on the armrests. She knew the game. Create the disruption, blame the reaction. She could feel the man behind her lean forward slightly, his presence now heavier than before. "Look," he said, his tone low but insistent, "it's just a seat. Not worth making a fuss over." Naomi didn't respond. She didn't owe him one. She owed herself stillness. The same attendant was now crouched beside an older woman in row 1, speaking softly, gesturing toward Naomi's seat, nodding as if seeking silent approval for the shift in atmosphere. Naomi remained silent, her eyes locked on the clouds outside the window. Another passenger across the aisle, a young woman, watched her for a moment longer than necessary. Naomi met her gaze briefly, then looked away. She wasn't here to make allies. She was here to witness what happened when the system thought it had no reason to pretend. The announcement echoed again, more performative this time. "We'll be documenting the interaction for post-flight review. Thank you for your understanding." Understanding, Naomi thought, was not what they wanted. They wanted agreement. They wanted submission. And when they didn't get it, they wanted witnesses to the punishment. A show of order. A ritual of humiliation. The female attendant returned once more, not with a request, but with a form. "This is a crew incident log," she said briskly. "It records your non-compliance for internal purposes. Signing is optional, but refusal will be noted." Naomi looked at the clipboard, read the words without touching it. Then she met the attendant's eyes and said, "You've documented the wrong incident." The woman said nothing. Naomi didn't sign. The clipboard was tucked away, but not quietly. The attendant stood, stepped back, and walked forward again with the measured pace of someone delivering a message through movement. Naomi's body remained still, but her thoughts churned with the weight of what had just occurred. She hadn't been denied service. She hadn't been shouted at or physically touched. But her place, her literal placement, had been contested in public. And worse, when she refused to surrender it, she'd been marked. Out loud, clearly, as the problem, as the disruption, as the passenger who didn't fit. She adjusted her seat belt slightly, glancing again at the aisle. No one made eye contact now. The cabin had absorbed the narrative and moved on. That's how it worked. A declaration made in public became its own truth, unchallenged by silence. Naomi felt the cold tighten around her again, not from altitude, but from calculation. This was the part of the story where judgment passed for policy, and bias wore a name tag. The attendant hadn't whispered. She hadn't implied. She had said it for everyone to hear, and everyone had heard. That was the power they believed they had, to rewrite the truth mid-flight in front of witnesses, and assume no one would question it. Naomi's breath slowed again. She reached once more for her notepad. This time, she didn't write words. She drew a square, for clean edges, a box to contain what had just happened. The shape wasn't for memory. It was for framing. Because sometimes the only way to make people see what's wrong is to box it in so tightly they can't escape the edges. Naomi didn't move for a long time after the flight attendant walked away, the clipboard incident fading only in volume, not in weight. Her mind was steady, her breathing quiet, but inside her chest there was a slow, growing compression, one not of fear or defeat, but of precise, sharpened focus. She'd been marked now, not in private, not quietly, but in full view of the cabin, her refusal rebranded as defiance. And when systems feel challenged, they don't retreat, they escalate. The next sign came subtly, masked in the rhythm of routine. The cabin crew began their first-class meal service, carts rolling down the aisle draped in white linen, stainless steel trays lifted with rehearsed elegance. The scent of miso-glazed salmon and herb-roasted chicken floated gently through the air. Naomi watched the ritual unfold with the detachment of a scientist in observation. Row 1 received their dishes with ease. Row 3, just behind her, began selecting options from printed menus. A soft-spoken attendant offered wine pairings with a curated smile. When the cart reached her row, the dynamic changed. The same female flight attendant from earlier, her face now reset to neutral, stood on the far side of the cart, scanning the list clipped to her serving tray. She looked up at Naomi without expression. "Ms. Ellis," she said flatly, "I don't have a meal listed for your seat. According to our manifest, your order was canceled at check-in." Naomi blinked once, processing the sentence. "I didn't cancel anything," she replied. "And no one asked me for a meal preference during boarding." The attendant's smile was tight, almost sympathetic. "Well, unfortunately, we only stock based on confirmations, and your record doesn't reflect a request." "It's first class," Naomi said, her tone still measured. "Isn't the meal included?" "Yes," the attendant replied, "but only for confirmed guests. Yours was logged as a courtesy upgrade." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "That's incorrect. My seat was booked, not upgraded." The attendant gave a small shrug. "It happens. Computer errors, overbooking, mismatched data." She didn't wait for further conversation. She moved on. The cart rolled past. Trays clinked. The man across the aisle received a second warm bread roll and a refill of champagne. Naomi sat still, the tension in her stomach no longer just from low glucose. It was insult layered atop neglect. The food wasn't the point. The exclusion was. She had been intentionally, publicly removed from the service cycle, and the justification, fabricated or otherwise, was delivered with a kind of sterile professionalism that shielded any accountability. She reached down, pressed the call button above her seat, and waited. The light illuminated with a soft chime. No one came. She waited a full minute, then pressed it again. Still no one. 5 rows down, a passenger called for another beverage and was answered within 30 seconds. Naomi looked around briefly, then pressed the button a third time, this time holding it just a beat longer. Still, no one appeared. It was as if her row had become invisible, or worse, designated as untouchable. The seatbelt sign wasn't on. There was no turbulence, no service interruption, just silence. A calculated, precise silence. She felt the dryness rising in her throat. She reached again for her glucose tabs, swallowing one slowly, deliberately. It wouldn't last her long, but it would do for now. Just as she returned the container to her bag, a different attendant, young, red-haired, less experienced by the look of his movements, passed by with a tray of empty glasses. Naomi caught his eye and spoke clearly. "Excuse me, may I have a glass of water?" He froze for a second, startled, then glanced toward the galley. "I'll check with the lead," he said, then disappeared. He never returned. 10 minutes passed. Naomi didn't press the button again. She knew now it had been disabled from the crew panel. It happened more often than people realized. Flight staff had override access for certain seats, usually for emergencies or disciplinary designation. And that was what they decided she was now. Not a customer, not a traveler, a disruption, a warning, a name on a log. As she sat silently, a different attendant passed by, an older woman with a sharp jawline and the gait of seniority. She didn't stop. But as she walked past Naomi's seat, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough to cut through the hum of the cabin. "Always needing something. Always think they're special." Naomi didn't flinch, but her mind marked the phrase, filed it. The venom wasn't personal. It was protocol masquerading as disdain. She had seen this before. In banks, in boardrooms, in hotels, in policy meetings where the language was cleaner but the intent was identical. Remove the access, starve the presence, then blame the reaction. The man in 2A beside her shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had said nothing this whole time, had stared ahead as if he were at a conference call with reality muted. But now, his fingers tapped lightly on his tray table. Naomi could feel his awareness growing, but not enough to speak. Not yet. That was always the breaking point. People noticed long before they admitted it. She checked the time. Still another hour in the air. She sat back, let the hunger press against her consciousness like a curtain slowly lowering, and let her eyes close, but not in fatigue. In calculation, in recording, there was no need to force confrontation. They had already chosen their performance. She would let them finish the act. And when the curtain rose again, they would find the audience had not been who they thought it was. The cabin had gone quiet again, the kind of silence that only comes in the final stretch of a flight when most passengers have either fallen asleep or surrendered to the lull of in-flight movies and recycled air. Naomi sat still, hands folded, body pulled inward not out of fear, but in preservation. She had consumed nothing, spoken only when necessary, and requested only what was humane, and for that, she had become a disruption to be muted. But she wasn't done. She never let a story close before the final paragraph had written itself. As the intercom crackled softly with an update from the flight deck, beginning our initial descent into Denver, Naomi finally rose from her seat. Her body moved slow, but not weak. Purpose had replaced weariness. She stepped into the aisle and made her way to the restroom at the front of the first-class cabin. No one stopped her this time. No clipped voices. No blocking stances. Just the long silence of people pretending not to notice. She entered, locked the door, and stood facing herself in the mirror. Her reflection didn't blink. She splashed water on her face, not to freshen up but to anchor herself, and counted 15 slow breaths. Then she stepped out. The cabin hadn't shifted. The lights had dimmed slightly for descent, but the air still carried the faint scent of plastic dinnerware and scented disinfectant. As she returned to her row, her eyes caught something before her brain processed it. Her bag was open. It wasn't gaping wide, not torn or emptied, but the zipper had been drawn halfway back, and the small leather folder she had tucked precisely in the center was now crooked, partially exposed, a corner sticking out unnaturally. Naomi froze for half a breath, then sat slowly. Her fingers moved with the kind of care usually reserved for fragile objects or painful truths. She reached for the folder and slid it out. The outer seam had a faint smudge, like a thumbprint wiped once. Inside, the papers were still intact, but the top document, a certified copy of a compliance case summary, was now creased. A clean diagonal line ran through the signature box, as though someone had folded the page hastily and then tried to smooth it back out. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't careless. It was the kind of mistake made by someone who thought they wouldn't get caught or didn't care if they did. Naomi didn't react. Not visibly. She simply returned the document to its place, closed the folder, zipped the bag with deliberate finality, and placed it back under her seat. Around her, the cabin was settling into landing procedures. Flight attendants bustled softly through aisles, checking belts and bins, performing the final pageantry of order before the wheels touched down. But just as she clipped her belt and straightened in her seat, the lead flight attendant, an older man with gray temples and a voice like polished stone, stepped into the aisle and walked directly toward her. His face carried none of the faux warmth from earlier interactions. No smile, no apology, just procedural detachment. He stopped beside her seat, crouched slightly to eye level, and spoke with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Ms. Ellis," he said, "I'm going to need you to review and sign this before deplaning." He handed her a thin form printed on official letterhead. Naomi read the title silently, Passenger Conduct Report Incident Documentation. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph. It stated that she had accessed overhead compartments not assigned to her, and moved personal items belonging to other guests, causing a temporary disruption in cabin order. The wording was careful, built to imply instability without accusation. Naomi looked up. Her voice didn't rise. None of that occurred. The flight attendant didn't blink. "We received reports from 2 crew members. As part of our protocol, we document the event regardless of outcome. Signing acknowledges receipt, not agreement." He held out a pen, the gesture rehearsed. Naomi didn't take it. "And the part about my bag?" she asked. "Who opened it?" His eyes remained neutral. "We have no record of staff accessing your belongings. If you believe someone tampered with your items, you may file a separate claim through our online portal after landing." Naomi didn't respond. She stared at him, her gaze even, until he shifted slightly, uncomfortable for the first time. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't touch the pen. She simply leaned back in her seat. He straightened slowly. "Without a signature, I'll need to log your refusal as part of the report," he added. Naomi nodded once. "Then log it." The words were simple, final, unshakable. He didn't reply. He walked away. The man beside her, silent for most of the flight, turned slightly toward her now, his lips parted as if to say something. But he didn't. He turned back to his screen. It was too late for words. Naomi sat motionless, one hand resting lightly on her bag, the other on her lap. Outside the window, the city was beginning to emerge, dots of light scattered across early morning haze. She felt the plane begin to descend more sharply. Landing was close. So was everything else. As the plane's wheels met the tarmac with a soft, controlled jolt, the passengers around Naomi exhaled in collective relief, a subconscious release of tension that signaled the end of the journey. Seat belts unclicked, window shades lifted, and the usual symphony of rustling bags and soft apologies filled the first-class cabin. Naomi, however, remained still. Her hands stayed folded neatly on her lap, her eyes focused on the back of the seat in front of her, as if reading something no one else could see. The man beside her grabbed his laptop bag from under the seat and stood, glancing once toward her with a look that attempted to convey something. Perhaps sympathy, perhaps discomfort. But Naomi didn't meet it. Her posture communicated what her silence confirmed. She wasn't ready to leave. Passengers shuffled forward, some offering polite nods to the crew, others already halfway into emails or travel plans. The aisle cleared row by row until the section was nearly empty. Naomi still sat unmoving. A younger flight attendant, not one of the ones involved earlier, paused near her row. "Ma'am, we've reached the gate," he said gently. "You're free to disembark." Naomi turned her head slowly, offering a small nod, then reached under her seat, retrieving her leather bag with care. From an interior pocket, she drew a deep crimson envelope, its seal waxed, its edges unbent, its weight undeniable. She stood, straightened her jacket, and stepped into the aisle without urgency. As she walked forward, she bypassed the galley where the lead attendant stood stiffly, clipboard in hand. He didn't speak this time. He simply watched. She reached the door of the aircraft, where a uniformed airport security officer waited near the jet bridge entrance, his posture relaxed, but his eyes attentive. Naomi held out the envelope. "This is for internal handling," she said quietly. "Open it in a private room. It includes a federal compliance directive." The officer blinked, caught off guard not by the envelope but by the tone, the unmistakable cadence of someone who wasn't making a request. He took it with both hands, then pressed a small mic clip to his collar. "Dispatch, I need an immediate supervisor escort to Jetway D14. Code red envelope received." A brief pause crackled back. "Confirmed. Supervisor en route. Hold passenger in place." Naomi didn't blink. She stepped aside to the edge of the bridge where a small service door remained closed. Moments later, a man in a tailored black suit arrived, not a uniformed officer, not a gate manager, but someone from a layer above, someone who didn't wear identification because his presence was identification. He moved with intention, his face unreadable, and when he reached the officer, he took the envelope, read the insignia on the seal, and gave a single nod. Then he turned to Naomi. "Ms. Ellis," he said calmly, "you'll come with me, please." She didn't hesitate. He didn't explain. He opened the service door with a badge that flashed no logo and led her into a separate corridor, one unused by passengers, lined with sterile walls and recessed cameras. The officer who took her envelope remained behind, speaking quickly into his earpiece. No one in the terminal questioned the scene. It happened too fast, too smoothly. Most passengers from her flight were already walking toward baggage claim, unaware that the woman they'd spent the last 2 hours silently dismissing had just triggered a protocol none of them had clearance to even ask about. As Naomi followed the man in the black suit, she remained composed, matching his pace. The hallway turned once, then again, opening into a secure room marked Operations Liaison Level 2. Inside were no waiting chairs, no windows, just a central table, a secure console, and a second man already seated. This one older, salt and pepper hair, wearing an earpiece and typing rapidly on a protected laptop. "Status?" the seated man asked without looking up. "Envelope confirmed, seal intact," the escort replied. "Directive aligns with Task Order 61A. She's the listed operator." The older man stopped typing and looked at Naomi. "I'll need verbal verification," he said. Naomi didn't hesitate. "Ellis. Naomi Celeste. Code 2-9 Alpha Bravo. Authorization keyed through Coastal Directive 6. I am the signer." The man gave a nod and turned the laptop to face her. The screen displayed a single line of text. "Pending authorization. Access Control Override Infrastructure Audit Chain Flight 2910. Naomi placed her thumb against the scanner pad beside the keyboard. A second later, the screen pulsed green. Outside the room, the ripple had already begun. The gate crew at D14 received a silent alert from their internal system. Passenger conduct flag, rescind all notations, review under federal audit. The log entry added beneath it read, "All documentation related to passenger 2A suspend immediately. Internal review pending. Do not contact passenger." In the crew lounge near the terminal service area, the flight lead checked his device and froze. The incident form he had just logged detailing Naomi's alleged disruption was now locked from editing and stamped under federal suppression. He reached for his comm device but stopped. There were no instructions for this. There was no script. In the operations room, Naomi remained standing. The two men conferred briefly, then one turned back to her. "We've activated the sequence," he said. "Your presence will not be acknowledged in any further procedural filings from this flight. A compliance hold is now in effect. Do you wish to proceed with escalation?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at the sealed envelope now resting on the center of the table. Her voice was even. "Not yet. I want to see what they do, without pressure. Let them rewrite their steps. Let's see who apologizes first." In the terminal, subtle changes were already appearing. The system had silently withdrawn all passenger alerts tied to Naomi's name. The gate agent who had first checked her boarding pass looked down at her tablet and noticed the flight manifest had shifted. Naomi's name now highlighted in gray, locked from view, and labeled Audit Exempt. Do not alter. She leaned over to her colleague, confused, whispering, "What does that even mean?" Her colleague shook her head. "I've never seen that flag. Not even for DOJ passengers." In the baggage claim area, a private courier entered the holding zone and handed a slip to the staff member in charge of passenger property. The slip bore no company name, just a barcode and a short directive. "Release to Ellis, Naomi. Confirm transfer, but do not engage." When Naomi exited the operations hallway 20 minutes later, she was flanked by the same man in the black suit, but now there were eyes on her. Not suspicious, not scornful, but cautious, uncertain, suddenly alert. She walked past the same airline employees who had ignored her earlier, past the same flight staff who had dismissed her without a second glance, and not a single one made eye contact now. She didn't break stride. She didn't speak. She didn't look back. The terminal lights gleamed above her, casting long reflections across the polished floor, and in that echo of silence, the shift had already begun. The moment Naomi stepped out of the restricted corridor and was led into the secondary operations room deep within terminal security, the tone of every voice changed. There were no orders barked, no clipboards waved, no staff trying to contain or redirect. Every movement was precise, deferential, curious, without daring to ask. The man in the black suit opened a second access control door, gestured for her to enter first, and then followed behind, sealing it shut with a fingerprint scan. Inside, the space was sleek and windowless, designed for conversations that weren't meant to be overheard. At the far end of the room sat a panel with dual monitors, and beside it, a woman in a high-collared blazer with a United S. insignia etched subtly on her lapel, looked up, nodded once, and stood. Naomi didn't wait for an introduction. She placed her leather bag on the table, pulled a file folder from its center pocket, and opened it with the kind of efficiency only government operatives are trained to perform. She withdrew a single sheet of identification, a federal badge, its edges micro-etched with security coding, and an agency seal embossed in deep metallic ink. She slid it across the table. "Naomi Celeste Ellis," she said evenly. "Field Division Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. Assigned to Operation Echo Vein. This is a joint audit initiative targeting air travel-based money laundering networks and fraudulent refund laundering tied to interagency rebates and internal bonus schemes. HFB Air was flagged 12 months ago. I've been embedded for 6. The room changed instantly. The woman on the panel glanced at the badge, then scanned a code on the back with her tablet. A confirmation pulse lit green across the screen. "Confirmed," she replied, now more formal. Was the trigger intentional? Naomi shook her head. Not today. But their actions created an optimal opportunity. The racial profiling and service denial protocols weren't just discriminatory. They followed pattern behavior consistent with financial manipulation and personnel rerouting for liability shielding. That gave me enough deviation to fast-track Phase 2. She placed a second envelope on the table, this one stamped with a red Federal Oversight watermark. Inside is a preliminary packet documenting active personnel misconduct, digital manifest manipulation, seat class override scripting, and internal note redaction tied to specific passenger types. She tapped the folder. All of it maps back to HFP's award payout system. Bonuses are calculated based on efficiency metrics, which include subtle suppression of high-cost passengers flagged by visual profiling. The intent is to downgrade individuals unlikely to contest their treatment and reassign high-reward upgrades to controllable profiles, usually connected to employee acquaintances or recurring passengers. It's manipulated to trigger fake upgrades, then skim returns into shadowed accounts labeled as fuel surcharges or customer recovery funds. The woman seated blinked once, not in disbelief, but in recognition. And the incident log they filed on you? Naomi opened a side pouch and removed a printed copy. Already scrubbed. Flagged for false entry and escalation without incident. Filed less than 30 seconds after I declined a seating reassignment, which by policy is voluntary. That's a breach of Title 49 Procedural Fairness Guidelines. But more importantly, it allowed the system to reroute the incident through their internal audit suppression framework. That's what kicked up the heat signature. I didn't plan for them to panic this quickly, but they handed me enough in one flight to trigger interim control. She sat, exhaled once, and looked directly at the woman across from her. As of now, I'm invoking Clause 18B of the Air Accountability Act. That authorizes me to initiate a temporary asset freeze on discretionary bonus funds related to internal metrics, pending a full audit. The man in the black suit stepped forward, speaking for the first time since they'd entered. That freeze would cover the entire fiscal distribution for Q3 bonuses, he said. That's over $6 million across 6 regional divisions. Naomi nodded, and they've earned every penny of that lockdown. The system shows that 47% of flag behavior notes filed this quarter were assigned to passengers of color, despite only representing 14% of first-class ticket holders. Their language filters, seating logs, and service omissions weren't subtle bias. They were operational, trained, rehearsed. The woman pulled up a mirrored live feed on her screen. It showed Gate D14, where 2 members of the flight crew were speaking with ground security, their body language nervous, animated. "They've noticed something's changed," she said dryly. "What do you want us to do with them?" Naomi leaned back slightly, arms folded. "Nothing yet. Let them sweat. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to watch who rewrites the story first, now that they realize the story isn't theirs to tell." At that moment, a soft chime blinked across the operations monitor. Notification received, the woman read. Internal bonus tracking system frozen under Class B escalation. 3 regional directors alerted. HFP legal ping for comment. They're requesting cause for activation. Naomi didn't hesitate. Send them back a single phrase. Passenger compliance misconduct under Audit Code 91F. Let them run circles trying to decrypt it. Meanwhile, initiate quiet queries on all flagged route adjustments and cross-reference those with employee performance surges. There's a pattern of falsified upgrades I've been tracking. Now, we finally have an anchor case. As she spoke, her voice remained even, not triumphant, not bitter, just unwavering. She wasn't here to shout. She didn't need to. The silence of protocol was louder than any confrontation. Her role wasn't vengeance. It was verification. And this flight had given her everything she needed. From the initial sideline at check-in to the public humiliation mid-flight. Every step had been recorded. But more importantly, every overreach had tightened the noose on the system that thought it would never be questioned. By this time tomorrow, Naomi said, eyes still on the screen, they'll know they've been under watch for over a year. And when the press asks why this story is breaking, we'll point to the manifest. Flight 2910, C2A, denied water, denied food, accused of noncompliance for not giving up her seat to a preferred guest. That's all it takes. One flight, one folder, and the system devours itself. Another chime blinked across the screen. Supplemental data, upload complete. Flight crew personnel flagged for preliminary review. Internal comms retrieved. Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out the leather folder one last time. This, she said quietly, was never about a seat. It was always about the system built around deciding who deserved one. And now that system has documented its own failure. The man in the black suit stepped to the door, speaking into his comm. Phase 3 is ready for deployment. Proceed on the 72-hour lock. All discretionary accounts, all travel-related bonus funds. Naomi's authorization confirmed. He looked back at her. You'll want to be out of sight when this lands. Naomi nodded, not smiling. I'm not here to be seen, she said. I'm here to be remembered in the audit trail. The consequences didn't come with a bang or a headline. They came with system flags, back-end alerts, and line-by-line reassignments sent in quietly coded memos that lit up every airline terminal control hub in the network. Within 48 hours of Naomi's federal seal being verified and her authorization logged into the Department of Transportation's secure oversight chain, every staff member directly involved in Flight 2910 service manifest received a notification from Human Capital Distribution Services. The emails came just before shift change, precisely when the schedule systems were least likely to raise noise, and landed with the kind of clinical efficiency only massive institutions can deliver when they're moving to protect themselves. Each email opened with the same subject line: operational realignment, immediate routing update. But the contents held the sting. Sloan, the lead flight attendant whose voice had once echoed through the cabin declaring Naomi noncompliant, stared at her screen in disbelief as the new assignment loaded. Domestic economy, route zone tier, C effective indefinitely. There was no appeal listed, no window for clarification, just a note at the bottom stating, per internal review status level 3. This reassignment is not disciplinary, but procedural pending cultural retraining clearance and third-party audit review. In practice, that meant she was grounded, not fired, not formally reprimanded, but stripped of all international rotations, removed from first and business class rosters, and reassigned to short-haul flights where her interactions would be monitored and logged under soft surveillance protocols. It wasn't just her. Trent, the gate agent who had waved Naomi past without scanning her ticket and later filed a manipulated incident report, opened his schedule to find he had been reassigned to a training coordination role at a regional airport in the middle of the Midwest. His access to VIP terminals and international check-in hubs had been revoked entirely. He stared at the screen, the color draining from his face as he reread the location. Bismarck Regional Temporary Assignment Duration. Undefined. Other crew members, those who had whispered, avoided, or watched Naomi's treatment without intervention, received downgraded routes as well. Not demotions on paper, but functionally undeniable. The message was clear: you are not being punished publicly, but you are no longer trusted privately. Inside HFB Air's Operations Center, an emergency briefing had been called. No one knew at first what it was about. Some assumed a mechanical recall. Others suspected a data breach. But when the Director of Internal Systems stepped into the room and activated the screen, the headline silenced everyone. It wasn't from a news outlet. It was from their own internal compliance dashboard. Code 91F. Misconduct detected, triggered by passenger authority verification. A second screen blinked to life beside it. This one showed anonymized call logs, flight rosters, and surveillance metadata from Flight 2910. The director cleared her throat and said, "This wasn't triggered by any crew report, not by a supervisor, not by a complaint. It was triggered by someone you didn't think had authority, because you didn't stop to ask if she did." Someone in the back murmured, "Who was she?" But the answer didn't come. Instead, the director tapped a key and pulled up an encrypted transcript summary labeled FFCT Authorized Agent Embedded Oversight, Confidential. Below that, a sentence had been flagged and highlighted in red. It read, "In systems of normalized profiling, the most effective disruptor is the profile itself." That line was included in Naomi's post-incident field report, submitted just 3 hours after she cleared the terminal. It was now being circulated across the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and even private industry HR training modules. The real shock came not from the internal memos or the personnel reshuffles, but from the leak. A whistleblower within the corporate communications team sent a PDF screenshot of the initial oversight trigger to an independent aviation watchdog group. Within 12 hours, it had been posted anonymously online. The post was simple, almost poetic in its irony. A screenshot of the system audit screen showing Naomi's incident being automatically escalated, not by a complaint, not by a customer service inquiry, but by a badge swipe that activated federal oversight protocols embedded deep inside the compliance infrastructure. The caption beneath it read, "They flagged the wrong person," and she flagged them back. The story spread like wildfire, not through traditional media first, but across back-end aviation forums, pilot Reddit channels, union message boards, and closed Facebook groups for airline personnel. What stunned everyone wasn't just that the system had caught the crew's misconduct, it was that it had done so because of the misconduct. Naomi's assignment had been to stay quiet, to observe, to report through long-term pattern analysis. But the events of Flight 2910 had escalated so aggressively that her embedded role shifted from passive audit to active trigger. She hadn't gone looking for conflict. They handed it to her, wrapped in bias, and labeled it policy. The fallout rippled quickly. HFB's executive compliance team issued a memo to all regional directors, reinforce awareness of latent bias and soft exclusion tactics. Effective immediately, all flight staff will be required to complete Phase 1 of the Passenger Equity Protocol training before their next international rotation. But it was too late to control the narrative. The leak had confirmed that someone within the federal system was embedded, watching, documenting, and, worse, responding in real time. Across other airlines, senior compliance officers scrambled to review their own passenger profiling logs. Was this isolated to HFB? Or was this a broader test? Were there more NAMIS watching? The silence from the federal task force was deafening and intentional. No confirmations, no denials, just one system-wide effect, fear of assumption. Naomi had become not just a symbol of quiet resistance, but a new kind of oversight, one that did knock, one that boarded like everyone else, sat down like anyone else, and only revealed herself when the damage was already done. In lounges and flight staff lounges across the country, whispers replaced laughter. Who else had they ignored? Who else had they pushed to the back of the line? And how many of those passengers had been more than they appeared? For years, the power dynamic of the sky had been measured by uniform, title, accent, or boarding group. But now, that hierarchy had cracked, and the realization that justice might be sitting into A without a sound was enough to make even the most confident crew member double-check their tone. 3 days later, in a marble-lined conference hall inside HFB Air's downtown headquarters, the room was filled to capacity with journalists, investors, aviation analysts, and industry watchdogs. The stage had been hastily erected, a long row of branded backdrops behind a podium flanked by 2 screens. Lights were positioned not for theatricality, but for visibility, because the company wanted this seen. The press had gotten wind of a major operational breach connected to Flight 2910, and rumors had already circulated through aviation newsletters and federal briefings that a passenger had triggered a top-level audit without speaking a word to the public. All eyes were now on the person who had to answer for it. When CEO Daniel Keene stepped onto the stage, his expression was appropriately neutral. Not smug, not defensive, just polished remorse in a $1,000 suit. He stood at the podium, looked out at the crowd, and began. Ladies and gentlemen, we called this briefing today not because we were forced, but because we believe in accountability. Over the past 72 hours, a series of internal missteps related to one of our flagship international flights came to light. Missteps that not only reflect procedural failure, but a deeper cultural blind spot we are committed to eradicating. He paused, allowing the moment to breathe. No one interrupted. The individual involved in that flight is not present today by choice. She has declined to appear, and we respect that. But she did provide a statement, which we will share in her own words. He turned slightly as one of the assistants tapped the screen controls. The projector on the left blinked to life. A simple black background appeared, with white text centered in the middle. There was no video, no image, no accompanying music. Just the words, "I don't need them to apologize to me. I need them to stop dismissing people who don't look like them." NC. The room went still. The weight of the quote wasn't in its eloquence. It was in its simplicity. It wasn't a call-out. It was a command. The CEO let it linger before continuing. That statement, brief as it is, perfectly encapsulates the problem we must confront, not only in our company, but in our industry. What happened to MS Ellis was not simply a lapse in service. It was a reflection of unconscious assumptions institutionalized into policy. And today that ends. He stepped aside as the second screen came to life. This time, the slide was titled, "Passenger Rights Recalibration Protocol Effective Across All Allied Carriers." Beneath it, a list of new policies began to scroll slowly. The first item read, "All frontline personnel are prohibited from applying subjective assessment to passenger eligibility, service access, or behavioral classification. Violations will result in mandatory reassignment pending investigation." The next item, "Flagging systems may no longer include demographic-based shorthand or non-verified behavior patterns." And finally, training on implicit bias is now required quarterly, not annually, for all staff interacting with customers above Tier C access level. The CEO returned to the podium. "We've shared this protocol not just with our employees, but with our global affiliates, 37 carriers across 5 continents. These new standards will be integrated into our booking, boarding, and in-flight systems immediately. We understand that change doesn't come with statements. It comes with structural shifts. Today we begin that shift." He nodded, signaling the end of the formal presentation, and the floor opened for questions. But Naomi wasn't there to answer them. She wasn't sitting in the front row. She wasn't on a live stream. Her image hadn't been plastered on a digital banner or framed in a viral clip. Instead, she was sitting alone in a small cafe on the other side of the city, watching the live stream on mute, her face unreadable as the camera panned over a room full of people now racing to do what they had failed to do in real time: listen. The barista didn't know who she was. The customers around her didn't glance twice. And that's exactly how she wanted it. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need gratitude. Her silence had already echoed further than outrage ever could. Because in a world obsessed with proof, Naomi had given them none, and yet delivered all of it. She had been reduced to a seat number, to a racial profile, to an assumed upgrade, to a problem to be documented and moved. And now, she had become the policy that would govern every interaction that followed. In the weeks that trailed, a ripple moved through the airline industry. Training departments across the country scrambled to update their onboarding materials. Unions demanded transparency in internal flagging systems. IT divisions rewrote flag codes to remove hidden bias triggers. And in the offices of several airlines, small groups met in soundproof rooms to review recorded flight logs, not because they had been asked to, but because they no longer trusted their own assumptions. One executive, reviewing Naomi's incident thread, leaned back in his chair and said quietly to no one in particular, "She didn't escalate a thing." And somehow, she brought the whole system to a stop. Other passengers, inspired by anonymous reports, began asking quiet questions on flights, about upgrade policies, about flagging codes, about why certain passengers always seemed to be randomly selected. Change didn't explode into the world. It seeped in, slow, relentless, inevitable. Naomi never issued another statement. She didn't sign a book deal. She didn't give an interview. She disappeared back into her agency rotation, her presence vanishing into the mechanism that had trained her to move in silence and strike through systems, not spotlights. But on every major flight now, every digital terminal, every crew huddle before boarding, her case number appeared in small print beneath new protocol documents. Not as a warning, as a reminder that not all justice comes loudly, that not every challenge is thrown across a table. Some are slipped across it in an envelope. Some are issued with a thumbprint. Some are delivered by simply sitting still, watching, waiting, and letting a machine believe it's untouchable until it touches the wrong person. Naomi had become that person, not with power shouted, but with power recognized too late. If this story gave you chills, made you think twice, or just made you stop and feel something, don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that challenge the way we see power, justice, and silence. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was there a detail you didn't see coming? And where in the world are you watching from right now? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your voice in this conversation.